Nearly a year has passed since tens of thousands of protesters marched in Jena, Louisiana, in one of the largest civil rights protests in years. The march condemned racism in the small town and the prosecution of 6 black high school students known as the Jena Six, who were jailed after a schoolyard fight. The fight occurred after white students hung nooses from a tree in the schoolyard. Now another racially explosive story is unfolding in a nearby Louisiana community. It involves a close relative of Mychal Bell, the lead defendant in the Jena Six case. Police in the city of Winnfield are being accused of covering up the death of an African-American man named Baron Pikes. Pikes was 21 years old. He was Bell's first cousin. Baron Pikes died in police custody on January 21st after being shot 9 times with a taser gun while in handcuffs. The city police chief initially claimed Pikes was high on crack cocaine and PCB at the time of his death. But the coroner has just ruled Pikes' death a homicide after an autopsy determined there were no drugs in his system. His death certificate states he died after being electroshocked 9 times while in police custody and restraint. The coroner also determined the police shot Pikes twice after he lost consciousness, tased him twice. Scott Nugent, the white police officer who tased Pikes, has been fired from the police department, but no charges has been filed in Pikes' death. We are joined right now by 3 guests. Howard Witt is the Southwest bureau chief of the Chicago Tribune. He wrote the first articles in the national press about both the killing of Baron Pikes and the Jena Six. Howard Witt was a finalist this year for the Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting for his wide-ranging examination of racial issues in America. Kayshawn Collins is also with us on the phone from Winnfield, Louisiana. She's the stepmother of Baron Pikes. And we're also joined on the phone from Winnfield by the police lieutenant and spokesperson, Charles Curry. We're going to begin, though, with Howard Witt. Howard Witt actually today is in Chicago for the Unity Conference, the largest gathering of journalists in the United States, journalists of color, the 4 major journalists of color organizations, the National Association of Black Journalists, the Native American Journalists Association, Asian American Journalists Association, and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. We'll broadcast from there in Chicago tomorrow. Howard Witt, can you lay out this case?
Yes, this incident happened last January, as you mentioned. Pikes there was an arrest warrant out for Pikes for possession of cocaine, I believe. The police officers, Nugent, spotted him walking on the street downtown, and in Winnfield, Pikes started running. They chased him down near a shopping center, out near a grocery store in a little shopping center. Nugent subdued him, handcuffed him, and then after Pikes was on the ground and handcuffed, Nugent began ordering him to get up and walk to the police car. Pikes either wouldn't or couldn't, and so Nugent then began a series of tasers shocks to Nugent, which continued for a period of about 14 minutes. And over the course of this 14 minutes, both on the ground and later in the police car and at the police station, they delivered 9 of these electroshocks to Pikes. As witnesses said, he was pleading for them to stop tasering him. And by the way, everything I've just told you comes directly from the police report that Scott Nugent, the officer himself, wrote about the case.
When you say they, in terms of the tasering of Pikes, who do you mean?
Well, according to all the police reports, there were 3 officers present. Nugent was the one actually delivering the taser shocks, and there were 2 other officers there at various times during this incident. One of them was a supervisor of Nugent and the guy who had actually taught him how to use the taser, and those other 2 officers were present, as I say, at various times during this incident.
Can you talk about how the story has changed? First, what was understood after he was killed, and then the information that has since been revealed?
Yes, the police initially said that Pikes, once he got to the police station, had told Nugent and the other officers that he had asthma and that he had ingested both PCP, or otherwise known as angel dust, and crack cocaine. And the police left it, the implication being that Pikes was, like many of these cases we've seen around the country, a raging suspect who had to be tasered to be subdued and basically died because of the drugs that he had taken. system. The coroner, however, found that there was nothing in Pikes' system. They found that he had no history of asthma, a fact that's also confirmed by Pikes' family, and therefore it makes it a little hard to believe that this man would have actually told the police that he had taken these drugs when, in fact, he hadn't taken these drugs. There was nothing in his system.
And the findings of the coroner and why they took so long and exactly what the coroner said, the medical examiner.
Yes, the coroner, who talked to me extensively about the case, struck me as a man who's really determined to make sure that the truth about the case comes out. He's told me that he took a very long time examining this case because he wanted to be sure of his conclusions. He'd never encountered a case like this before. He told me he did a lot of research into the medical effects of these taser devices, and he also took the extra step of submitting his findings and an autopsy that was performed to two other independent forensic examiners. One of them, Dr. Mychal, is a nationally known forensic pathologist in New York. The other is Dr. Frank Mignard, who was the medical examiner down in New Orleans, who was the man who did most of the Katrina work as far as the unfortunate people who died there. So he sent his findings to both of them to ask them to look over his shoulder, basically, and see if his analysis was correct. And both of those forensic pathologists came back and concurred. And in fact, Dr. Baden, who I talked to, said that in his estimation what was done to Pikes was tantamount to torture.
Lieutenant Charles Curry, you're lieutenant in the Winnfield Police Department. You're the police spokesperson of Winnfield. Your response?
Response to Mr. Witt?
Yes.
Now, I really don't know what the coroner's told him. All we've have seen has been the death certificate. The actual autopsy, as far as I know, has not been released to the public or to the police department.
The ruling that this is a homicide, that Scooter Pikes was not on PCP, that his body was clear of drugs. Your response to those findings?
Like I said, at this time, I can't comment on that because I don't have an autopsy to refer to.
Can you talk about what has happened to Scott Nugent? Was he fired?
Scott Nugent was fired in May on a recommendation from the chief of police based on some policy and procedure, failure to follow policy and procedures in this incident and his actions afterwards.
Why was he fired? Exactly. For this case?
It's directly related to this case and his failure to follow policy and procedures in dealing with that case. It's still currently under appeals with the Civil Service Board.
Do you think he was correct in tasering Baron Pikes?
Without knowing all the facts of the case, I'm not going to comment on that.
Howard Witt, does it surprise you that the police spokesperson, that Lieutenant Charles Curry, hasn't seen the autopsy report? This now is, well, about more than 6 months after the death of Baron Pikes, though it did just recently come out.
Well, I talked to Lieutenant Curry when I was in Winnfield last week, and, you know, he was pretty forthcoming with me, and, you know, I take him at his word that he hasn't actually seen it. It is true that none of this has been officially released yet because it's really still all under investigation. The coroner's file and investigation has been forwarded to the local district attorney, Chris Nevels. He himself has said that he is awaiting the results of a Louisiana State Police investigation of this case, which are due to be delivered to him perhaps as early as tomorrow. After which Neville says he will look carefully at all of that and will take the case to a local grand jury, which will then decide whether or not to indict Scott Nugent on any charges in this case.